battery E, a lithium.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here with two of our experts on China and trade, Senators Wyden and Senator Brown. Now, just a few hours ago, President Trump and his administration committed the United States to a weak, feckless Phase 1 trade deal with China. The President has said again and again that he's a deal maker. He cares about American jobs and industry, and he's tough on China. But when the pressure is on, when jobs and livelihoods are at stake, he buckles. Today's no exception, unfortunately. While the history books remember that Nixon went to China, they will also remember that Trump bent to China. Though President Trump is touting this agreement as the biggest ever, I believe the stunning lack of substance and long-term reform achieved will harm American workers and industry. Several harmful policies and practices, the core of how China takes advantage of us, remain unaddressed. The agreement does not address the Chinese government's massive subsidies to support domestic industries, devastating global markets, and eroding American competitiveness. The agreement does not address the unfair preferential treatment of China's state-owned enterprises, entities which are subject to control by the Chinese Communist Party. The agreement does not address China's illegal dumping of products into the U.S. market at artificially low prices, threatening American jobs, putting American companies out of business. The agreement does not meaningfully address China's cyber theft and intrusions into the computer networks of American companies of wealth and jobs. Millions of jobs, probably trillions of dollars over the years. And lastly, this agreement does not address the fact that significant financial harm has already been made to American farmers, many of whom have watched their markets disappear and gone bankrupt in the time it took to make this deal. Now, let me be clear. I supported the President taking tough action on China. I was rooting for him to succeed. I said over and over again that Trump's views on China are closer, my views on China are closer to Trump's than to previous administrations, Democrat or Republican. But this so-called deal does next to nothing of substance for workers and businesses feeling the brutal, merciless weight of China's trade and industrial abuse. I greatly fear that President Xi is laughing at us behind our backs for having given away so little at the expense of American workers, farmers, and businesses. The administration, in order to get a deal at all costs before the 2020 election, has thrown the American worker and American business overboard, and they're going to be the ones left to face the consequences. So, here's what I'm calling for today. The President shouldn't wait for Phase 2 in 2021 or 2022. He should get back to the table and fix Phase 1 now, not 2 years from now, today. Stop the victory lap and get back to work protecting American workers. Despite the President's grandiose, colorful claims about how great the deal is, the American people should know the truth. The President's trade deal with China is a severe and potentially irreparable loss for the American people, American businesses, and American workers. I know the President attacked me in his press conference at the White House a few minutes ago, so let me close by addressing that directly. I know what's in the deal. I'm not sure the President does. If he knows what's in the deal, he should throw it away and take China back to the negotiating table. I will cheer him on if he does. Senator Brown.
Whatever you want to do.
Okay. You go.
Thank you, Senator Schumer, and he's made a number of important points, and I want to touch on some issues that we're getting a lot of questions about at the Finance Committee, which is the committee where Senator Brown and I serve and really rides point in the Senate on trade issues. And it starts with enforcement questions. And good enforcement is everything. And you see it with the Brown-Wyden effort on USMCA that we'll be voting on, because this is a departure from more than a quarter century of lack of enforcement. And we're getting a lot of calls about how this particular agreement would be enforced. And what the public should know is that this enforcement mechanism relies on what used to be called a telephone tree. In other words, if you have a problem, a whole bunch of people are going to talk to each other. That's essentially what the enforcement is supposed to be under this, a complicated and escalated series of meetings between government officials. If the meetings don't resolve our differences, as far as we can tell, tariffs can be imposed. To put it simply, that is exactly where we are today. So let's start with that, and that will be a key issue that Senator Brown and I follow up on, because we led the effort in terms of enforcement on the most recent agreement, the USMCA. Then there is the question of, is this deal really different than past deals? And I will tell you, on key issues like technology transfer, this deal basically repackages what China has been promising for decades. And for those of you that are having trouble sleeping, and I am kidding because it's a really wonderful document, the Congressional Research Service looked at the last 20 years of broken promises with respect to technology transfer by China, and this is essentially more of the same, literally more of the same. And then finally, with respect to people just trying to sort out what this is all about, is the country is going to want to know, are we better off than we were before Donald Trump began this whole effort with China? As far as I can tell, the answer is essentially no. So far, we have China's predatory practices, we have tariffs harming American businesses and retaliatory tariffs impacting American farmers, and we got a whole lot of words on paper. And there's been a signing ceremony and a lot of declarations of victory, but so far it's hard to really determine what we're better off on today than we were previously. Now, with respect to China's purchasing an additional $200 billion in goods, I believe China ought to purchase U.S. goods because in my part of the world, we produce wonderful wheat and wine and blueberries. We grow them. The system, however, where governments decide when and how crops and commodities are bought and sold is not a winner for the United States in the long term. Our workers and farmers do best when we have a level playing field, and I will just tell you, from my standpoint as the ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee, where Senator Brown and I dig into the enforcement issues and the like, with respect to the key question of a level playing field, this agreement is more of a Band-Aid than a solution. So now Senator Brown, who has been our leader on these issues on the Finance Committee, and particularly in enforcement, you'll hear us talking later today about it. Senator Brown.
Thank you. Senator Leader Schumer, thank you. And thanks to Senator Wyden for his work, especially in USMCA, and making that an agreement we can be proud of that puts workers at the center of the agreement, not the Trump way of putting corporations at the center of the agreement. Just like his first NAFTA draft, this deal with China is another corporate trade deal, another betrayal of American workers. And you will hear that term betrayal time and time again because that's what this is. President Trump wanted to pretend he got a win for his own political campaign, so he sold out American workers and he caved to China. The agreement wasn't even public until about an hour ago. Some of it will never be public, but you can bet that drug companies and tech companies have seen what's in this deal. We know why they negotiate these trade agreements behind closed doors. Trade agreement after trade agreement after trade agreement has been written by multinational corporations behind closed doors. They write the agreements that benefit them, always at the expense of their workers. This agreement is no different from every other trade agreement. For decades, I've watched this corporate business model where companies shut down in Toledo, in Cleveland, in Schenectady, and in Portland. They move overseas, set up production in Wuhan or Beijing or Shanghai, and then send their products back to the United States, where they can exploit, when they move their production, they exploit low-wage workers and then sell those products back. This agreement does nothing to change this business model. It may make it even worse. The administration admitted that labor rights never came up in these negotiations once. That labor rights never came up. You can't say you're for American workers. You can't say you're for American jobs if you're not going to fight for them at the most important place in these agreements at the negotiating table. The deal does nothing to make the Chinese government play fair. China's state-owned enterprises, as Leader Schumer said, they're state-owned enterprises owned by the Chinese Communist Party, flood our markets with goods, put American workers out of jobs. Under this deal, they'll still be doing business as usual. The Chinese government won't have to end its subsidy program, which helped China cheat its way into being a global leader in a number of industries. Ohio's steel industry knows that all too well. Just more business as usual when it comes to trade. This is just one more corporate trade deal written in secret by multinational corporations who offshore jobs to China, multinational corporations who write these agreements for their own benefit at the expense of workers. Just like the first draft of USMCA, the president negotiated was another betrayal of American workers. This agreement is more of the same.
Questions on this subject? Yes.
Isabel Ixo, Inside U.S. Trade. Can you all elaborate a bit further? Is this better than no deal at all?
Well, I don't think it is, because most of everything they're saying is they're going to get all the important things in round two. Once China knows they can treat us the way they did and basically get what they need, I think the prospects for anything in round two that would be any better are minimal. And therefore, I'd rather have no agreement and negotiate the whole thing, including all the important stuff, which is not in this, than this agreement, which basically gives away our leverage.
People's Republic of China now have confirmed to them that they're going to deal on trade policy based on the American political calendar. And they know that President Trump was going to come to the table and accomplish nothing for American workers because it's all about Election Day coming up in 10 months. They know that. That's how they will operate in the future because the president's wrong-headed.
That is such an important point, because if you have seen on a key issue like tech transfer, which is something that really puts at risk America's seed corn and our ability to innovate, and they just repackage the same thing that they've done year after year after year, you end up saying, what is there here other than a bunch of words on paper?
And even the thing they're touting, the purchase of agricultural goods, it's dubious that this will happen. The amount they put in is almost impossible for China to consume. And furthermore, China has already signed long-term contracts for soybeans and many other products with places like Argentina and Brazil. Ron mentioned this, given the fact that China always signs these agreements and then ignores them, I'm even dubious that our farmers will benefit.
Leader Schumer, Sabrina Rodriguez from Toledo. So you're standing next to two of the chief architects of, the labor enforcement provisions in the new USMCA. Are you going to vote for the agreement?
I'm still looking at it and deciding.
And what are your thoughts on it so far?
That's what I'm looking at it and deciding. Yes.
Do you see a legislative vehicle option for Congress to use to push back on
Well, we'll look at all of them. There's limited time here. But the greatest danger in this proposal is what it gives away, our negotiating leverage to get real things done. And it's very hard. It's one of the main reasons we need a new president. It's very hard if you have a president who, as Sherrod mentioned, decides to sign these deals by the election calendar or decides to sign these deals by photo ops, not by really helping American workers. It's very hard when you have a president who sides with corporate America over workers almost every time to get something done. The real answer to a good deal with China is a new president.
Think about on the agriculture part. Think about the president's decision on the waivers for the oil refineries. The president chose gave 31 waivers, I believe it was 31, maybe 21 waivers to oil refineries, choosing the oil industry over farmers. Now he has this agreement that will give a little bit of this back to the farmers. So he cost the farmers these markets. Some of these markets, as Senator Schumer said, took years to build. He gave them away so that farmers, so these markets, these companies to these countries selling them are no longer the United States. Brazil and others are exporting soybeans, and then we're going to give a little bit back to the farmers.
And I also believe that when there's no timetable for when the next phase is going to be completed, you have more leverage when you point out how little there is actually there right now. In other words, I saw the press conference. My goodness, this was the greatest thing in the annals of Western civilization. People are now going to come back and say, where's the substance? We've been talking about agriculture. We've been talking about technology, which is America's future. We're going to have an opportunity, and you've seen Senator Brown and I on the floor walking through how the enforcement provisions on USMCA came about. What we were sent was just business as usual. We said a prerequisite now will be something that, as Senator Brown said, allows him to break with 25 years of votes on trade policy. So what you're hearing from our leader, Senator Schumer, Senator Brown, and myself, is something we are going to pound away at in terms of the flaws in this phase one agreement. And then people are going to say, so what happens now? We say, I think they ought to get on with the job of fixing what they didn't fix in round one. I think that gives us more leverage.
Any other questions on this subject? Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, everybody, so there you have it. Democrats on Capitol Hill giving their opinions on the China trade deal. We're going to head back to that spacewalk, the ISS expedition. Let's listen in.
Airlock on 1. Can you just confirm that EV1 and 2 are not hot mic anymore?
They are not hot mics.
Copy, thanks.
However, the video is still public. We're working on it, though.
During today's 7-hour and 29-minute spacewalk, NASA astronauts Christina Cook and Jessica Meir moved 3 old nickel-hydrogen batteries to the external pallet to eventually be disposed, stowed one on the integrated electronics assembly, and put 2 new lithium-ion batteries in the integrated electronics assembly. This sets them up for their next spacewalk together on Monday, when they'll install the final lithium-ion battery and remove the final 2 nickel-hydrogen batteries from the 2B channel on the Port 6 truss.